Under the gray sky of the Middle Ages, where life was governed by power and reputation above all else, marriage was never a matter of the heart. It was a game of the heart. It was a game of power, a cold strategy arranged by powerful families where personal emotions had no place, and love was merely a luxury that common folk would never know. The story begins on a drizzly afternoon in the land of Yorkshire, where Lord Edmund Blackthorne, the head of the mighty Blackthorne clan, sat in the great hall of the ancient castle. The flickering candlelight revealed his stern face. Before him lay a marriage contract manuscript, sealed with the royal red wax. This marriage was not for Edmund, but for his only daughter, Lady Isolde. Isolde, a 17-year-old maiden, had just come of age to marry, according to her father's wishes, unaware that her future had been decided like a pawn on the political chessboard. Her future husband was Jasper, the only son of Lord Morcant, a wealthy family, but always a rival competing for status with the Blackthorns. This marriage would mark a new alliance, boosting the influence of both clans, and most importantly, avoiding bloody wars that could erupt over a small piece of land. Isolde once dreamed of a man she loved, a life full of laughter and freedom. But all those illusions quickly vanished when her father sent someone to deliver the marriage proposal. Jasper's parents also came to the castle, bearing cold faces and clear conditions: dowry, lands, rights, and absolute control over Isolde's future. But the matter was not simply a deal between two families. Hidden deep in the shadows of this marriage were secret plots, silent powers no one dared to speak of. Only a week after the marriage news was publicly announced, secret letters began appearing in Isolde's chamber. The letters bore no seal, were written in a strange black ink containing only brief and mysterious lines. You are not the only one in this plan. Stay away from Jasper or your soul will be torn apart. Someone in the castle is watching your every step. Isolde did not know whom to trust, her heart full of worry. Was her family hiding some dark secret? Or was there a hostile force aiming to sabotage this alliance? Meanwhile, Jasper still appeared courteous and determined, always beside her with a powerful smile, but his eyes were cold to the point of fear. One night, as the rain poured down on the castle roof, Isolde heard strange footsteps in the empty corridor. She quietly left her room, following the sound through long, dark hallways. At a small room behind a secret wall, she saw a man wearing a black cloak, whispering to another shadowy figure. Their conversation ended quickly when they noticed her, and they managed to escape before Isolde could clearly see their faces. Back in her room, her heart pounding fast, Isolde knew she had stepped into a dangerous game far beyond what she had ever imagined. The wedding day was approaching, and the atmosphere at the castle was tenser than ever. Everyone played their part in this power play. But on the night before the big day, an unexpected event occurred. Jasper mysteriously disappeared without a trace. It was said that he had been kidnapped, or perhaps his own family had made another move to sabotage the alliance. Isolde, standing on the fragile boundary between helplessness and responsibility, was told a terrible secret. Other forces in the kingdom also wanted to break the balance of power that this marriage created. A rebellious group of nobles, long secretly jealous and hostile to both families, were planning to overthrow everything. With no other choice, Isolde decided to use her own intelligence and courage to uncover the truth. With secret help from a loyal servant, the only one she trusted, she began investigating the shadows that covered the castle. Small clues connected, horrifying secrets gradually revealed. There was a conspiracy using the marriage as a cover to carry out a coup to seize all the power in the region. Some members of the family, and even those closest, were not true allies. The search lasted many days and nights as unexpected enemies appeared, assassination rumors spread, and thrilling mind games took place in the dark. Isolde faced risky choices: how to protect her family, ensure the marriage went as planned without being sabotaged. On the wedding night, the castle was bathed in candlelight and the sound of ceremonial music echoed. Everyone gathered in the great hall, including those full of schemes and plots. But Jasper still did not appear. Suddenly, the large door burst open, and a man with a deep wound on his face, someone Isolde never expected, Jasper himself. He returned with untold secrets, warning that this marriage was not only an alliance between two families, but also the starting point of a bloody and endless war. The story of Isolde and Jasper was not a love story, but a symphony of power, betrayal, and conspiracies buried deep in the shadows. Marriage was not the union of two hearts, but a battle of souls forced to play the game of power, where love and emotions were buried under the ruins of interest. That was the reality of the Middle Ages, a world not meant for dreamers, where love became a pawn and marriage the battlefield of those thirsty for power. Isolde, though small in this power game, proved that courage and wisdom could kindle a small flame, enough to change the fate of an entire family in the endless night. Under the dim moonlight filtering through the ancient castle windows, Lady Isolde could never forget that fateful night when her future husband, Jasper, returned with a bloodied face and a cold warning about a surrounding conspiracy. The story of power and betrayal was not over. It had only just begun to open a new chapter with more complicated twists. Marriage was not only a power arrangement, but also a strict economic contract, a deal of land rights and social status where every step was carefully calculated. The next day, in the family council room, the candle flickered again in the wind, reflecting on the tense faces of the lords and nobles attending the meeting. Lord Edmund Blackthorne stood in the center of the room, his voice deep and commanding, but unable to hide his worry. We have stepped into a game bigger than anything ever imagined. It is not just a simple marriage, but an economic transaction, a contract tied to dowries, land, and the status of entire clans. All eyes turned to him, for these words meant new terms, heavier commitments, and unavoidable sacrifices. Isolde, though young, quickly realized her role was not simply that of a daughter-in-law in an alliance. She began to be invited to secret negotiations where every inch of land, every dowry gift was measured by power and the survival of the family. Every piece of jewelry she wore carried its own meaning, not only a dowry, but also a symbol of economic and political relationships. Meanwhile, the mysterious disappearance of Jasper the night before the wedding remained a big question. Rumors said he had been kidnapped by rebels aiming to disrupt the economic marriage contract between the two families. But the truth might be even more terrifying. One night, Isolde received a strange gift, a small locked wooden box containing the original marriage contract, a document that only Lord Edmund and Morcant were supposed to see. On the paper, clear terms about dowries, land rights, and control over assets were meticulously recorded. But what chilled Isolde was the ending clause, written in tiny blue ink, meant only for insiders to read. If within 6 months from the wedding day, the Morcant clan fails to hold the Landhaven lands, their power and assets will be fully transferred to the Blackthorn clan, and Lady Isolde, though wife to Jasper, will lose all rights over any property. Those words felt like a dagger straight into her heart. This was no longer about marriage, but a war for power through an economic contract, where the wife was merely a pawn in the noble's game. Isolde understood she had to not only protect her family, but also fight for her own rights against forces she once trusted. Soon after, plots grew more complex. A secret meeting of lords at Morcant Castle was interrupted when a group dressed in black cloaks attacked, aiming to seize important documents related to the marriage contract and lands. The attack lasted through the night, flames blazing, screams echoing through the castle. Isolde and Jasper, despite extreme tension, had to cooperate to escape the chaos. Moreover, a shocking truth was revealed. The mastermind behind the attack was none other than a member of the Blackthorn clan, someone Edmund trusted completely. The motive was not just money or power, but to eliminate Jasper, who was seen as the greatest threat to personal ambitions. Amid these struggles, Isolde gradually realized the marriage contract was not just a signed paper between two families, but a complex web of strict economic demands, dowries, assets, land rights, and social status, all tightly connected and inseparable. During this tense time, Jasper was seriously wounded in an ambush, lying unconscious in bed. Isolde, with a heart growing cold from harsh reality, decided she would not let conspiracies and power tear apart her family and life. She devised a daring plan, using the very terms in the economic contract to renegotiate rights while investigating and exposing the traitor inside. Isolde leveraged every piece of land, every dowry item as strategic cards in a battle of wits. The negotiation between the two clans took place in a secret room beneath the castle, with the most powerful figures present. The atmosphere was tense like a drawn bowstring, every word carefully weighed. Isolde entered the room, her gaze as sharp as any seasoned lord's. She placed a bag of expensive jewelry on the table, the last dowry the Morcant family could offer, and said, "The dowry is not just wealth, but a commitment, faith, and the survival of the lineage. I will not accept dark schemes that destroy our future." Those words silenced the entire room. An invisible force was being challenged, and a new power struggle began. Not with swords, but with the intelligence, cunning, and decisiveness of a young woman once underestimated. And in the darkness of the ancient castle, as the wind howled through the windows, Isolde realized one thing. No matter how cruel an economic contract marriage may be, true power lies with the one who knows how to wield it wisely. Where power and social prejudice impose on every breath of life, love becomes a luxury not everyone has the right to dream of. Behind plots of power, marriage contracts, and land wars, the story of Isolde and Jasper reveals another perspective about the bonds and limits of love, where personal feelings must give way to ritual and the strict surveillance of feudal society. From childhood, Isolde was taught that love was not her concern. Her father, Lord Edmund Blackthorne, once sternly reminded her, "Do not let the temptations of love blind you, for it is only the game of those who do not understand responsibility and power." In their world, love was only permitted within the bounds of ceremony, ritual, and above all, for the benefit of the family. For the nobility, courtly love was a carefully staged form where people praised and admired a woman from afar, but were never allowed to come close. Romantic love letters were exchanged in darkness, protected by codes and silence, because any disclosure could disgrace the family or lead to political trouble. Love here was not for reality, but to beautify life, preserve image, and power. Isolde recalled one time when she found a hidden letter in Jasper's room. It contained poetic lines full of illusion, praising her beauty and dignity, but also a vow that could not be shown outwardly. Jasper, though chosen as her husband, was also a victim of these limits, caught in a suffocating web of rituals and strict control. In contrast, in small villages far from castles and power, love had a very different tone. There, ordinary people had no time or conditions to dream of flowery stories. They chose partners based on workability, care, and capacity to protect the family against harsh natural and social dangers. In the small village near the Wye River, Anna and Thomas, a common couple, endured difficult months together to build a home. They knew nothing of coded letters or court rituals, only loving through practical deeds, plowing fields together, sharing every meal, and protecting their children from hunger and cold. For them, love was the bond of two people in daily life, with no room for deceit or escape. One day, when Isolde happened to meet Anna while passing through the village, she saw in the eyes of that common woman a great difference, a simple but powerful love, needing no rituals, no supervision, just pure understanding and sharing. This made Isolde begin to doubt the limits she once believed in, about a world where love could be free and true. However, back at the castle, dangers still lurked around her. One day, while walking in the secret garden, Isolde discovered a stranger listening to the advisor's conversation in the shadows. This person was no stranger, but Jasper's closest friend, a very ambitious man plotting to use the marriage to seize power. The pieces of the conspiracy gradually unfold. Love is not only restrained by rituals and power, but also threatened by betrayal and ruthless personal schemes. Moreover, on a stormy night, Isolde receives an unsigned letter sent by an unknown sender. The content is full of implications. True love is not imprisoned within the palace walls. Be careful with those around you, for not everyone is an ally. That warning chills her to the bone, because even within her own family, loyalty is a luxury. The wedding day approaches, and the atmosphere in the castle becomes suffocating, like a taut string about to snap. On the grand day, while all eyes focus on the couple, Isolde and Jasper keep a cold distance, like two strangers forced to connect. They must follow a script set beforehand, hiding their true feelings inside. Then a shocking surprise happens. At the moment of exchanging rings, a scream erupts from the audience. A young woman, ragged in appearance but with sharp eyes, steps forward and declares that she is Jasper's real fiancée, a secret hidden for many years. The shouting, the panic, and the accusations turn the ceremony into chaos. Courtly love, economic contracts, power, All are torn apart in that moment, revealing dark and thrilling truths. Isolde, standing amid the chaos, feels like a discarded puppet, but inside her, a rebellious fire begins to burn. She is not just a wife in a soulless contract, but a woman with the right to choose, capable of changing her own fate and that of her family. The story of Isolde, Jasper, and those around them is like a multi-dimensional painting of love in the Middle Ages, from the lavish and mysterious rituals of courtly love to the practical, simple, but vibrant relationships of common folk. Love, in any form, carries transformative power but is also full of dangers and unavoidable schemes. Beneath the dense fog of the Middle Ages, where ancient castles hide among dark forests, choosing a life partner is not simply a matter of power arrangements or economic transactions, as many think. Hidden deep within the shadows of ceremonies and marriage contracts lies a mystical world, where astrology, body signs, and supernatural omens become life or death factors for a person, especially in choosing a lifelong companion. After painful events and full of power conspiracies, Isolde now steps into a new journey, a journey to understand the invisible forces controlling her life. Though she is a person of reason and responsibility, the matters of astrology and omens still compel her attention. One evening, as Isolde sits by the window watching the silver moonlight reflected on the calm lake, a strange woman enters her room. Morgana, a famous astrologer in the region, who has served many powerful families with astonishingly accurate predictions. Morgana not only reads fate through the stars, but also masters decoding body signs and omens from nature. She looks at Isolde with penetrating eyes and says, "Lady Isolde, her fate is not only written in contracts or human schemes, it is also written by the stars, the birthmarks on her skin, and the birdsong echoing in the deep forest. Her marriage will be the crossroads of great destinies." The next day, Morgana began performing mysterious astrological rituals. She drew star charts, studied the positions of the planets, then compared them with the fate of Jasper, Isolde's future husband. Numbers, circles, and ancient symbols were delicately depicted on parchment. Through each line, Morgana discovered many abnormalities. Conflicts between the two star charts, stars that died young on Jasper's life path, along with signs of inner conflict that could not be easily explained. Not only astrology, Morgana also carefully examined the signs on Isolde's body. A small black birthmark near her wrist was pointed out as the mark of transformation, signaling major future upheavals. Meanwhile, a mole near Jasper's eyelid was seen as a warning of a deep gaze hiding danger. From these omens, Morgana advised Isolde to be more cautious in maintaining her relationship and to prepare for the challenges that marriage would bring. Each sign is a story, a warning. Do not underestimate them, as many families have been destroyed by neglecting these things, she emphasized. When news of these omens spread throughout the castle, many began whispering, especially those who had already doubted the marriage between the Blackthorn and Morcant families. Some considered it a curse. Others saw it as a sign of dark conspiracies lurking. One day, Isolde experienced a strange event while walking in the royal garden. A large owl flew by, its call echoing through the silent night. In medieval beliefs, the owl was an omen of misfortune or impending death. Isolde shuddered, feeling as if something dark was lurking around her. But the mystery did not end there. One night, while deeply asleep, Isolde dreamed of a mighty lion chained, roaring thunderously as if trying to break free. Morgana explained this image as a symbol of Isolde's inner self, power imprisoned, ready to erupt to claim freedom and survival. The dream was a premonition of great events about to come. Meanwhile, Jasper was not immune to the influence of omens. One morning, while checking his star chart, he discovered a small star on the astrological arc symbolizing a sudden storm, a sign indicating that his life would face many unpredictable upheavals. These omens were not limited to the spiritual realm. One day, when Lord Edmund's council discussed land defense strategy, a secret letter arrived from an anonymous source warning that an assassination attempt on Jasper would occur within the next month. Isolde was no longer just a girl standing on the brink of a marriage full of power and mystery, but a fighter against invisible and visible forces. She realized that to survive and protect her family, she had to learn to read and understand the signs of the universe, combining intellect and supernatural faith. As the wedding day approached, tension rose. On the night before the ceremony, an attempted assassination occurred. A castle guard was found dead with a deep wound on his neck. All suspicion fell on the rebels trying to break the alliance, but Isolde believed there were traitors hidden within her own family. On the wedding day, under flickering candlelight, Isolde and Jasper stood before everyone. But instead of vows, a shout erupted from the crowd. A man dressed in black stepped forward, holding up a scroll, evidence of a plot to eliminate Jasper and seize the Morcant family's power. Chaos ensued. Lord Edmund coldly declared he would deal mercilessly with the traitor. But Isolde realized a shocking truth. The mastermind behind the plot was one of her father's closest advisors, someone she had trusted completely. The battle between power and fate was not only fought on battlefields, but also within each soul. Astrology, bodily signs, and omens were not mere superstitions, but stern reminders of destiny, forcing Isolde and Jasper to be more alert and stronger than ever. In the quiet night after the turmoil, Isolde stood on the balcony, looking up at the starry sky. She silently vowed, "No matter what fate decides, I will not be subdued. I will use both wisdom and faith to walk through the darkness, to protect what belongs to me." Love and marriage were not simply the union of two hearts, but a complex labyrinth intertwined with spiritual beliefs and superstitions. In Isolde's world, where power and fate were governed by invisible forces, every step hid taboos, mystical rituals, and ghosts of the past. After the terrible events surrounding her marriage to Jasper, Isolde now had to face not only power conspiracies and economic contracts, but also deeply understand the beliefs and superstitions embedded in her family's life. For in this era, every ritual, every oral tale carried curses, omens, and divine protection. Isolde and Jasper's wedding date had been set, but not just any day was allowed for the ceremony. According to the elders of the Blackthorn lineage, choosing the wedding day was the most important ritual. The day had to avoid bad times like the Earth God's Day or Yin Void Day, moments when evil spirits were most likely to intrude. Everything had to be strictly observed, not only to protect the family's reputation, but also to ensure the marriage was not struck by misfortune. Isolde recalled the day when Morgana, the famous astrologer, repeatedly said, "You must choose the wedding day based on the destiny of both of you, avoiding the times when malevolent energy is strongest." She also advised that the number of guests should not be even or odd, depending on regions, because, according to belief, even numbers bring stability but could lead to sudden endings, while odd numbers imply incompleteness and imbalance. On the day preparing for the wedding, priests and sorcerers from both families were summoned to perform exorcism rituals, burning herbs like basil, angelica, and other sacred plants to drive away evil spirits and bring peace to the young couple. The incense smoke rose faintly in the golden candlelight, blending with the sound of drums and chanting echoing through the ancient castle. The carefully prepared talismans, small embroidered fabric pouches containing various gemstones, dried leaves, and strands of hair, believed to hold special energy. Isolde was given a necklace by her mother with a deep blue stone, said to protect her from all dangers and evil spirits. However, not everyone trusted these rituals completely. Jasper, though raised in nobility, was always skeptical. He once sneered upon hearing about superstitions and mysterious rites, considering them nothing more than tricks to mesmerize the weak-minded. But it was this very skepticism that ignited a series of thrilling and dramatic events. On the night before the wedding, while Isolde was sound asleep in her room, a strange noise echoed from the hallway. She woke up and saw the shadowy figure of a stranger stealthily moving near her chamber. Isolde silently followed and discovered the intruder was a trusted servant of the castle carrying a strange charm in his hand. It seemed he was preparing a dark ritual to sabotage the wedding and her fate. The sight made Isolde's heart pound wildly. She realized that beliefs and superstitions were not just harmless rituals, but could be tools of dark forces used to manipulate and destroy. More surprisingly, when confronting the servant the next morning, Isolde found out he was coerced into working for a faction within the family, conspirators using superstition and faith to spread fear and division. Tensions within the castle grew increasingly strained, mingling between true faith and superstition, between those who trusted in the divine and those exploiting belief for personal ambition. Isolde decided not to become a pawn of these forces. She began to study the rituals more deeply, learning to distinguish pure faith from dark superstition. She learned from Lady Morgana how to use herbs to cleanse energy and made her own talismans to protect herself and her family. One stormy evening, while Isolde was performing a banishing ritual in the upper garden, she sensed a strong energy approaching. A figure emerged from the shadows and drew near. She recognized Jasper, her future husband, who had always been skeptical and challenged these beliefs. Jasper stood beside her, looking up at the starry sky, then said, "Perhaps I was wrong, Isolde. There are things beyond reason and we must face them together." From that moment, the two were not just spouses by a political contract, but allies in the battle to protect love, family, and soul from lurking dark forces. But the challenges were far from over. On the night before the wedding, a fierce storm struck, winds howling like mourning spirits. The candles in the castle were extinguished, plunging the place into darkness and panic. In the chaos, a scream came from the ceremony room. Isolde rushed over and discovered the talisman box was missing, sending her into deep panic. Without the box, the protective ritual would be meaningless, and the fate of her and her family could be threatened. The story grew more intense when Isolde found out the box's disappearance was caused by another family member she had never suspected, someone always appearing loyal but secretly manipulating from behind. The search for the talisman box turned into a dramatic chase through the ancient castle, down dark corridors, secret chambers, and damp underground tunnels. Finally, in a hidden room beneath the castle basement, Isolde found the box, along with letters revealing a plot to overthrow the family and destroy her marriage through faith and belief. She stood in the darkness, holding the box, her heart full of determination. Whether faith or superstition, I will not let any force control my life. I will use belief itself to protect love and family. In the heavy atmosphere, the church bells rang like a declaration of the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter of struggle, love, and light, piercing through darkness. Under the magnificent dome of Canterbury Cathedral, light shone through stained glass windows, creating sparkling beams in the silent space. In the Middle Ages, where the power of the Christian church covered all aspects of life, the story of love and marriage was not just a personal matter, but also a stage for strict control, harsh regulations, and unforgiving punishments. Isolde, after her turbulent days, now understood more clearly the church's strict control over the personal lives of individuals, especially in love and marriage. She recalled a gloomy afternoon when her father, Lord Edmund, together with Jasper, attended a secret meeting with Cardinal Benedict, the most powerful clergyman in the region. Cardinal Benedict embodied religious power, controlling not only souls, but also the status of people under his domain. He entered the meeting room in a deep black robe, his sharp eyes making no one dare to resist. "In the eyes of the church, marriage is a sacred sacrament," he said, his voice echoing in the cold stone room. "Every marriage must follow the rites, laws, and traditions. Any violation will be severely punished to maintain purity and social order." The meeting revolved around the terms of Isolde and Jasper's marriage contract, not only concerning economy or power, but also meeting religious conditions. The church did not accept marriages without proper ceremonies and paid special attention to prohibitions on consanguinity, something that had caused many noble families crises. 1 week later, Isolde was taken to the great church to participate in the marriage baptism, an indispensable ceremony to legitimize her relationship with Jasper. She wore a pure white dress, standing before the high altar where the priest was reading prayers. All eyes were on her, tension and pressure weighing heavily on her shoulders. During the ceremony, Isolde could not help but think about those who had been punished by the church for breaking marriage laws. There was a story of a woman named Eleanor who was ostracized from the community for adultery with another nobleman and later exiled into a deep forest where it was said she died in loneliness and despair. Not only women but men also did not escape harsh punishments. A young noble named Robert was heavily punished for breaking his betrothal oath, losing lands, and being imprisoned in the castle dungeon for many years. These punishments aim not only to discipline individuals, but also to set an example for society, warning anyone who dared to oppose the authority of the church. The story of Isolde becomes even more complicated when she discovers that within her own family, there are those who secretly violate these regulations. One of them is Jasper's younger brother, a young man suspected of having an illicit relationship with a maid in the castle. News of this quickly spreads, and Cardinal Benedict orders a strict investigation. The pressure from the church makes every meeting between men and women tense and full of suspicion. Every love letter or sweet word must be kept secret, even forbidden. It is said that even a glance or a small gesture can become evidence to be reported and punished. Isolde remembers the first time she received a love letter from Jasper. The letter was carefully hidden inside a book, but unfortunately was discovered by a maid who reported it to the church. This act could lead to Jasper being severely punished, and Isolde was sternly warned. On a rainy night, while Isolde was in her room, there was a soft knock at the door. It was Jasper, who secretly came to visit her under the faint moonlight. They knew that every meeting like this was a great risk. In the darkness, they exchanged sweet vows, small hopes for a free future. But soon, one of the family's trusted members discovered the matter and reported it to the church. A secret investigation was opened, while enemies exploited the event to exert pressure, threatening to expose and disgrace the Blackthorn family. In a secret meeting, Cardinal Benedict gave a cold warning. If anyone is found to seriously violate marriage laws, we will show no mercy. Social ostracism, fines, and in severe cases, imprisonment or exile are unavoidable. The intervention of the church made the whole castle suffocating. Emotional relationships were strangled under constant surveillance. Many had to live in secrecy, fear, and unspoken secrets. One night, Isolde heard a scream from the next room. She ran over and discovered that a young maid was caught in an illicit meeting with another noble. The maid was imprisoned in a dungeon under the basement, forbidden to contact anyone except the priest to repent and change. The story grew tense when Jasper's younger brother, in desperation, decided to escape the castle to avoid punishment. However, he was captured and would have to endure the harshest punishment the church could impose. Amid these suffocating pressures, Isolde felt increasingly exhausted and trapped. She realized that in the Middle Ages, love was not a human right, but a commodity controlled and manipulated by the church and power. But it was in this dark veil that Isolde began to nurture a spirit of resistance. She was determined not to let prejudices and harsh regulations suffocate her life and love. She sought to connect with progressive thinkers inside and outside the family to find a way out. One night, in a small room outside the castle, Isolde met a young cleric named Father Thomas, a compassionate man with understanding of both religious and civil law. He was the only one she trusted to share her hopes and worries. Father Thomas listened to the story, then gently said, "Love is a gift from God. No one has the right to suffocate it. But it is undeniable that the church and society at this time set strict limits. What matters is that you know how to fight with wisdom and perseverance." Together with Father Thomas, Isolde began planning for a different future. A future where love would no longer be bound by harsh laws and strict surveillance. But to achieve that, she had to face the most powerful forces in the region: religious and noble authority. Isolde's story was not only a journey to find love and happiness, but also a battle for personal freedom in a world dominated by the strict laws of the church and power intrigues. In the darkness of the long night, as the candlelight dimmed, Isolde stood on the castle balcony, gazing toward the distant horizon where the stars twinkled, reminding her of a future full of challenges, but also brimming with hope. Under the harsh sky of the vast steppe, amid the biting cold winds, Tomyris, the legendary queen of the Masajite people, stood firm beside her sharp sword, her eyes as fierce as burning fire. She was not only the leader of a wild tribe, but also an unyielding symbol of female power and strength in an era when war and authority were almost exclusively men's privileges. In the context of the ancient world, the Persian Empire under King Cyrus the Great was expanding its territory forcefully, like a fierce wave swallowing all lands and civilizations in its path. Yet in the north, amid wild and treacherous lands, the Masajite, a fierce warrior tribe, steadfastly maintained their independence under Tomyris's leadership. Tomyris was not a silent queen in a grand palace. She grew up amidst endless plains where the sound of galloping horses and clashing steel echoed through daily struggles for survival. From childhood, she was trained to become a warrior, not only through physical strength, but also through extraordinary intelligence and courage. The story of Tamaris resounded like a legend in every blazing sunset, in the tales told by the Masajede around their campfires. She once declared to her tribe, "Freedom is not something that can be bought or given. It must be protected with our own blood and sweat." Tamaris's resilience and indomitable spirit made even Cyrus the Great, who had conquered vast lands, cautious. As the Persian Empire approached the borders of the Masajete, a fierce war between the two forces began. The battle between the Masajete army, led by Tamiris and Cyrus's mighty forces, became one of the decisive conflicts in ancient history. Tamiris knew well that her enemy not only outnumbered them, but also had sophisticated strategies. Yet she faced the challenge without hesitation. Before the battle began, Tamiris held strategic meetings with her generals. She was not only a commander, but also an inspirer, igniting determination and an unyielding fighting spirit in her soldiers. One of Tamiris's notable tactics was to exploit the vast steppe terrain, using sudden ambushes to disrupt enemy formations. She also skillfully employed psychological warfare, sowing fear and confusion among the Persian troops. The battle raged intensely for days and nights, with dramatic duels between warriors. Tamiris, wielding her sharp sword, fought relentlessly within the enemy encirclement, becoming a symbol of strength and bravery. At a decisive moment, Tamiris pierced through the enemy's defenses, confronting a Persian general in single combat. That duel was not only a fight for life and death, but also a symbol of the unyielding spirit of a female warrior in a man's world. After bloody and fierce days, the Masajete army under the leadership of Tamiris achieved a resounding victory, pushing the Persian Empire away from their borders. This victory not only secured their independence, but also created an immortal symbol of strength and willpower. The story of Tamiris goes beyond battlefield achievements. She became a symbol of freedom, power, and the resilience of women. She proved that in a society where power often favored men, a woman could rise to lead and protect her people with extraordinary intelligence and strength. Legend has it that after the victory, Tamiris made a famous statement to Cyrus the Great: "You may conquer lands, but you will never conquer the hearts of the Masajete." These words were a solemn vow affirming her indomitable spirit and that of her tribe. Through centuries, the story of Tamiris remains a source of inspiration for generations, especially women seeking strength and independence in life. She was not only a steadfast general, but also an immortal symbol of female power. In the feudal society dominated by men, Tamiris stands as a vivid proof that the power of will, courage, and perseverance can change history. The image of Tamiris and the Masajete riding swiftly across vast steppes, the sound of hooves thunderous like thunder, and the sharp sword in her hand like a flame burning down all barriers, has become an eternal symbol of freedom and resilience. The story also records details about Tamiris's daily life, a woman who was both tough on the battlefield and caring for her family and people. She was a model of balance between power and compassion. Many historians and writers have drawn inspiration from Tamiris to write about feminism, strength, and the unyielding spirit of women throughout history. In modern culture, Tamiris is honored not only as a legendary female general, but also as a symbol of independence, confidence, and bravery, qualities anyone needs on the journey of life. The legend of Tamiris is not only a tale of war, but also a lesson in resilience, sacrifice, and the desire for freedom. She reminds us that true strength lies in willpower and an unyielding spirit. On bright moonlit nights, when stories of Tamiris are told by the fire, the eyes of young girls in the tribe shine with faith and hope. They know that if a woman like Tamiris could change the course of history, then nothing is impossible for themselves. Isolde, hearing those stories, felt a strong connection between herself and the legendary queen. She seemed to find a new source of strength to continue fighting in her world, where power, love, and fate always intertwined in a complex game. Thus, the story of Tamiris is not only an ancient legend, but also a guiding torch, illuminating the path for women today and tomorrow who are stepping out of the shadows to affirm themselves in every field of life. Under the dim light of an oil lamp in a small room in the ancient city of Halicarnassus, Herodotus, the historian known as the father of history, was intently recording stories of distant lands and extraordinary people who had left their marks on world history. Among these, the tale of Tomyris, the warrior queen of the Massagetae, continually troubled him due to the mysterious blend of fact and legend. Herodotus understood that history was not merely dry numbers and events, but stories passed down through generations, colored by emotions, beliefs, and the imaginations of those who told them. The story of Tomyris was not only about a battle against the Persian Empire, but also a symbol of resilience, female strength, and the indomitable spirit of women in ancient society. In his work, Herodotus recounted that Tomyris led the Massagetae tribe against the invasion of Cyrus the Great. Yet, he also acknowledged that many details might be folk legends orally transmitted over generations, embroidered to highlight her qualities and power. One of the most striking details was the story of how Tomyris handled Cyrus's body after the battle. According to legend, Tomyris killed Cyrus and severed his head, placing it in a blood-filled vessel, a deed both revenge and a symbol of her defiance and assertion of power. However, the historical truth about Cyrus's death remains debated among scholars. Herodotus wrote, "There are stories told not only to remember events, but to teach future generations lessons of courage and steadfastness." Thus, he did not hesitate to blend fact and myth to create a vivid portrait of people and their era. What is remarkable in Herodotus's narrative is that Tomyris is not only a heroic general, but also a symbol of female authority in a society overwhelmingly dominated by men. Through her, the Massagetae queen became an inspiration for later generations, even in modern times when gender equality is increasingly valued. Herodotus also noted that using legend to recount history was a common method in his culture, helping listeners easily remember and pass on important lessons. Yet, this also made stories multifaceted, opening them to various interpretations and compelling readers to discern between fact and fiction themselves. From another perspective, the stories of Tomyris told through the lenses of different peoples created differing images of her. To the Persians, Tomyris might be a fearsome enemy, while to the Massagetae, she was a legendary queen, the protector of her people's freedom and honor. The tale of Tomyris is further intertwined with legends of other female heroes, forming a multifaceted cultural symbol that is both historical and richly mythological. This helped her transcend the boundaries of time and place to become an emblem of strength, independence, and the unyielding spirit of women. When Isolde heard these stories through monks and scholars, she felt a profound connection with Queen Tomyris. She saw in her the reflection of herself, a woman endlessly struggling between power, love, and destiny. On long nights by flickering fires, Isolde often imagined Tomyris on the battlefield, sword sharp and gaze resolute. The queen was like an invisible companion, lending strength to her own fight for freedom and personal power. Herodotus also emphasized that the stories about Tomyris were not merely history, but reflections of contemporary social views and beliefs about the role of women, loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. The details, though sometimes romanticized or mystical, gave the story enduring vitality, ensuring it would never be forgotten over time. For modern historians, the story of Tomyris presents a challenge to analyze and seek truth within layers of legend and record. At the same time, it serves as evidence of the power of oral culture and the lasting life of strong cultural symbols. Over time, Tomyris became an inspiration for works of art, literature, and movements for gender equality. She was not only a warrior queen, but also a symbol of inner strength and indomitable will. Stories about her continue to be retold and transformed through generations. Yet at their core remains the image of a resilient woman daring to stand against the mightiest forces to protect freedom and honor. Isolde, on her journey, understood that power lies not only in weapons or authority, but also in spirit and faith. The story of Tomyris helped her realize that no matter how many hardships and pressures life brings, a determined woman can change her fate. Thus, the legend of Tomyris, through the pen of Herodotus, is not just a historical tale, but a multidimensional cultural symbol, forever inspiring and awakening the courage of those who dare to dream and act. As empires rose and endless wars claimed countless lives, the images of resilient female leaders like Tamiris, queen of the Massagetes, and Boudica, wife of King Decebalus, leader of the Dacians, became immortal symbols of strength, wisdom, and resilience of women of that era. These two women, though from different lands, both portrayed a multifaceted portrait of the role and power of women in ancient society. Tamiris, as we know, was the fierce queen and general of the Massagetes, a hardy nomadic tribe in the Central Asian steppes. She not only led armies against the mighty Persian Empire, but also became a symbol of female power in a world dominated overwhelmingly by men. Meanwhile, Boudica, wife of Decebalus, the last king of the Dacians, a people living in what is now Romania and surrounding areas, played an equally important role in history. Decebalus is famous for his prolonged wars against the powerful Roman Empire under Emperor Trajan. During those years, Boudica was not only his partner, but also advisor, companion, and a symbol of the Dacian nation's strength. Unlike Tamiris, who directly commanded armies in battle, Boudica is recorded as having profound influence in political and strategic decisions, as well as embodying unity and national spirit when the country faced the threat of invasion. Comparing Tamiris and Boudica, we notice clear similarities in their personal strength and social roles. First, both are powerful women who greatly influenced the fate of their nations. They not only served as strong supporters, but also directly participated in strategic and political decisions. Second, they both displayed indomitable spirit and extraordinary courage, ready to face harsh challenges to protect their nation's independence and honor. Third, besides military or political power, both Tamiris and Boudica were closely connected to social, religious, and family aspects, creating a complex identity for women's roles in ancient society. However, there are notable differences. Tamiris, according to Herodotus's records, was a queen and a warrior directly on the battlefield. She led the Massagetes army in fierce battles against the Persian Empire. The image of her riding a horse, sword in hand amid the flames, became a timeless symbol of female strength. In contrast, Boudica is seen more as a spiritual protector of the nation, a unifier of social and religious classes during wartime. Her influence lay in maintaining unity, inspiring and supporting Decebalus in key decisions. The story of Boudica is less widely told than that of Tamiris, but this does not diminish her importance. On the contrary, Boudica's image evokes another aspect of female power, the power of gentle influence, patience, and wisdom in preserving the survival of the people. Moreover, the war against the Roman Empire presented completely different challenges compared to the war between Tamiris and Cyrus the Great. While Tamiris faced an empire in expansion, Boudica and Decebalus had to stand against one of the most powerful empires in history. Boudica's image is also closely linked to the religious and spiritual beliefs of the Dacians. She is believed to have played a role in spiritual rituals, helping strengthen the fighting spirit of the nation through faith in ancient gods. To better understand the complexity of women's roles in ancient society, we must recognize that they were not only warriors or leaders on battlefields or in councils, but also guardians of traditions, culture, and communal beliefs. In the story of Isolde, a young woman living in the Middle Ages full of conspiracies and power struggles, the images of Tamiris and Boudica become great sources of inspiration. She sees herself in their strong, brave qualities, while understanding that strength also lies in maintaining family, social, and spiritual connections. Isolde learns that to survive and thrive in a challenging world, women need not only personal strength, but also the ability to integrate and leverage social, religious, and familial relationships, just as Boudica did. One evening, sitting by the flickering fire in the castle, Isolde recounts to her close friends the fairy tales about Tamiris and Boudica. These stories are like a flame lighting their hearts, awakening willpower and hidden strength. One of the most dramatic moments is when Isolde faces the forces within the castle that seek to restrict her freedom and love. She recalls Tamiris's resilient spirit and Boudica's cleverness and wisdom to overcome dark conspiracies. On a mysterious night, as a storm swept across the prairie, Isolde received a mysterious message, an old letter recounting the exploits of Boudica, along with words about the strength and wisdom of women. That message was not only a source of spiritual power, but also a warning about lurking dangers, urging Isolde to prepare for the battles ahead, not only on the battlefield of power, but also within hearts and society. The combination of personal strength and social roles of female leaders like Tomiris and Boudica opens a multi-dimensional perspective on the position of women in history. They were not only warriors or politicians, but also symbols of resilience, intellect, and deep bonds with their communities. Their stories inspire many generations of women and men, reminding that power lies not only in physical strength or status, but also in the ability to build and maintain social, cultural, and spiritual relationships. Isolde, on her journey to find her place and voice in medieval feudal society, understood that true strength comes from balancing the individual and the community, power and love, reason and faith. Thus, through the stories of Tomiris, Boudica, and other female leaders, we see a vivid and complex picture of women's roles in history, a role indispensable and always vibrant. The life of nomadic tribes was not just endless adventures, but also a story of flexibility and special equality in social structure. In that world, women were not merely keepers of the hearth, but leaders, warriors, and symbols of power on par with men. After days of involvement in struggles for power and freedom, Isolde began to explore the profound values of nomadic society, communities that shaped a distinctive image of women's position and strength. Unlike the feudal society where she lived, where power and status were often linked to men, nomadic tribes presented a more diverse and complex social picture. The Massagetae, the people once led by Queen Tomiris, were a typical example. Here, women were not simply rear support. They were warriors on the battlefield, strategic planners, and central figures in crucial tribal decisions. Oral stories said Tomiris not only galloped on horseback, sword in hand, leading the army, but also maintained harmony within the tribe, connecting families and preserving religious traditions. This versatility made her a rare model of female power in history. Isolde heard stories by the campfire about other nomadic female warriors who competed alongside men in battles and held spiritual and social leadership roles. They were not bound by gender prejudices, as in settled societies, but were judged by talent, intelligence, and courage. In tribal meetings, women's voices were valued as much as men's. They had rights to decide on land, war, and peace issues. Power was not only in the hands of male leaders, but shared equally, creating a flexible and lively social structure. Having experienced the strict pressures of feudal society, Isolde felt a strange freedom hearing about the nomadic social model. She realized that women's strength was not confined to cities or palaces, but could be fully realized in vast lands and adventurous lives. Beyond combat, nomadic women were protectors of culture, traditions, and religion. They served as bridges between generations, preserving spiritual values and passing them down to descendants. However, life was not all rosy. In battles against expanding empires like Persia and Rome, nomadic women also faced harsh challenges. They not only fought to protect their territories, but also had to safeguard the lives of their families and communities from brutal invasions. In a fierce battle told in legend, Tomiris and her female warriors suddenly appeared in a decisive ambush, scattering the vast Persian army. That scene was not only a military victory, but also a testament to the strength and unyielding resilience of nomadic women. The diversity of women's roles was also shown through their direct participation in religious ceremonies and traditional customs. They were the keepers of faith, performing rituals to ward off evil spirits, pray for rain, or offer sacrifices to the gods, rites closely tied to the survival of the community. One night, in the secret garden of the castle, Isolde met again with Morgana, the famous astrologer and healer who had once guided her about energy and destiny. Morgana told Isolde about the rituals and traditions of nomadic tribes, where power and sacredness were always tightly linked to the role of women. Morgana said, "There, women are not only the lineage bearers, but also the keepers of the tribe's soul. They fight, lead, and even heal. That is true equality, not just in name." Those words lit a new fire in Isolde's mind, a yearning to live freely, strongly, and unbounded by old prejudices. She realized that a woman's true strength did not lie in where she was born, but in her spirit, will, and ability to overcome all barriers. Isolde began seeking to learn from the nomadic social model, from the flexibility and equality in women's roles. She understood that to survive and triumph in a life full of conspiracies and dangers, she needed to develop her personal power and build a solid social support network. One day, while walking through the castle's long corridors, Isolde overheard whispers about a secret meeting between military and religious leaders. She decided to investigate and discovered that the meeting was about restricting women's power in their tribe to protect the interests of the male noble class. This truth enraged Isolde and strengthened her resolve to fight. She recalled the image of the nomadic female warriors who never submitted to any force. She silently vowed that she, too, must become such a person, a warrior of freedom and power. From then on, Isolde began building an underground movement in the castle, connecting women with progressive ideas and a hunger for power. They exchanged information, learned from each other, and planned to change the old social structure, creating a more equal environment. In secret nights, Isolde told them stories about Tamiris, about the nomadic female warriors who stood up against the great empire, about the power of equality and the spirit of solidarity. Those stories not only boosted morale, but also forged a strong alliance. But the path of struggle was never smooth. Enemies inside the castle, those who wanted to keep the old order, began to watch and seek ways to destroy Isolde's movement. Ambushes, assassination plots, and calculated negotiations happened one after another. One stormy night, as Isolde was returning to her room, she was ambushed by a group of enemies. The confrontation was dramatic and breathtaking, but with agility and decisiveness, she narrowly escaped, carrying important information about the opposition's plans. That event was a great awakening, making the movement's members realize they had to unite more closely and fight more wisely to protect their common goal. They began using secret communication methods, exchanging information through symbols and codes to avoid enemy detection. Meanwhile, Isolde also learned how to combine personal strength with social roles, knowing when to fight directly and when to use intellect and social influence to create change. She gradually became a symbol of a new generation of women, strong, confident, and resilient. The stories of nomadic tribes and the special role of women within them were not just ancient legends, but vivid inspirations for those seeking equality and power in modern life. Isolde, standing on the castle balcony, looked toward the vast horizon, feeling the power of the wind and the tales of brave women from ancient times fueling her spirit. She knew the journey ahead held many challenges, but with spirit and will, she would never retreat. Nomadic tribes were not merely solitary wanderers, but important bridges connecting ancient civilizations. In their constant movement, they carried not only food and supplies, but also invisible gifts, customs, traditions, knowledge, and cultural exchanges, forming a complex living network across distant lands. After months immersed in the complex world of castle power, Isolde began to hear stories of nomadic tribes, people who enriched the cultural tapestry of the ancient world. These tales were passed down in secret meetings through wandering travelers and merchants. Nomadic tribes such as the Massagetæ and the Scythians never lived in isolation, but continuously moved across vast territories. They were natural traders, transporting goods between distant lands and creating bustling trade routes linking civilizations like Persia, Rome, Greece, and many others. Isolde once heard about a caravan of nomads carrying saddles filled with silk, spices, war horses, and precious ceramics. They traveled through regions exchanging goods and spreading customs, farming techniques, fighting skills, and legendary stories sung around campfires. One notable story Isolde heard was how nomads brought traditional songs, heroic tales, and spiritual rituals from the Central Asian steppes to the major cities of the Roman Empire, where culture and religion were deeply influenced by foreign inspirations. In these stories, exchanges occurred not only in material trade, but also in spiritual and cultural realms. Nomadic tribes taught each other how to respect nature, perform rain-making ceremonies, worship deities connected to earth and sky, and shared distinctive fighting and hunting techniques. What was special was that their traditions were not written down, but lived vividly in memory: music, folk songs, legends, and spiritual rites. Village elders and spiritual keepers bore the responsibility to pass down this precious knowledge to the next generation, preserving history, cultural identity. During long nights, Isolde often imagined flickering fires on the steppe, where nomads sat telling each other stories of heroes, wars defending their lands, and adventures taking them across distant regions. Their constant movement created not only trade networks, but also cultural bridges, enriching the diversity and richness of ancient civilizations. These cultural gifts helped form the panoramic history of humanity, where ongoing exchange and interaction fueled development. However, the journey of the nomadic tribes was not always smooth. They faced dangers such as robbery, conflicts with great empires, and the harshness of nature. Each trip was not only a physical challenge, but also a spiritual journey, where resilience and wisdom determined survival. One night, Isolde received a mysterious letter from a nomadic friend, recounting a dramatic meeting between tribes on a distant steppe. At that meeting, tribal leaders fiercely debated expanding trade routes, but also faced the risk of attacks from enemies. That story evoked in Isolde the complexity and diversity of social and economic relations within nomadic communities, where power was based not only on military strength, but also on wisdom in interpersonal dealings and negotiation skills. Stories about connections between civilizations through trade and cultural exchange were an indispensable part of Isolde's journey. She understood that to develop and survive, one needed not only personal strength, but also the ability to build bridges, relationships, and respect diversity. The story of the nomadic tribes was also a reminder that history was not only about battles and treaties, but also about the interaction and diffusion of cultural, spiritual values and sharing among people. In her journey, Isolde learned that connection and exchange between civilizations were essential to creating prosperity and peace, even in the most difficult circumstances. She saw in the image of the nomadic tribes a lesson about flexibility, adaptability, and community strength, important factors to overcome challenges and move forward. Thus, the story of the nomadic tribes was not only a legend about adventurers on the steppe, but also a story about the power of connection, exchange, and the vigorous vitality of human culture. The life of the nomadic tribes was always woven with threads of freedom and flexibility, two core qualities that made the vibrant strength of communities that never stayed in one place. Unlike settled societies with solid walls and strict laws, nomadic life was an unending journey of adaptation, improvisation, and exploration. Isolde, a young woman full of ambition and desire for freedom, had often heard tales of nomadic life as a vivid legend. Through oral stories, she felt that the spirit of freedom was not only a trait, but also a strategic strength, helping nomadic tribes overcome many challenges of their era. Unlike fixed civilizations, nomadic tribes were not bound by borders or fortresses. They moved continuously, choosing places to live based on natural conditions, safety, and resources. This flexibility not only helped them survive, but also created advantages in confrontations with great empires. Isolde imagined the days on the vast steppe where caravans galloped on horseback, crossing wild lands and facing all dangers. It was the life of people who constantly changed, knew how to adapt, and turned danger into opportunity. The nomadic spirit of freedom was not only expressed through movement, but also in how they organized society. Without cumbersome administrative systems or strict laws like ancient cities, nomadic tribes operated by consensus, flexible decisions, and respect for individuals. Isolde realized that this flexibility was the key that helped nomads not be strangled by rigid social constraints, where women could be empowered to lead, fight, and freely develop themselves. One night, while Isolde was walking in the royal garden, she heard drums and flute sounds echoing from a folk ceremony of invited nomads. Those melodies were not only music, but also a praise of the spirit of freedom and flexibility in their lives. The rituals, stories, and traditional songs are means for nomadic tribes to preserve history, traditions, and community bonds. They are not fixed in books, but always transformed and adapted to fit each time and circumstance. The spirit of freedom is also expressed in how nomadic tribes respond to historical upheavals. When empires expanded, they were neither subdued nor passive, but constantly sought to change tactics, move to new lands, or build alliances to protect their independence. Isolde saw a strong contrast between the flexible, free life of the nomads and the suffocating constraints of the castle where she lived. She understood that to escape the grip of power and ritual, she needed to learn from that spirit. That flexible spirit was also reflected in the social relationships of the nomadic tribes. Family and tribal ties were not bound by rigid laws, but based on respect, support, and the ability to adapt to new circumstances. Once, Isolde attended a secret meeting with progressive thinkers in the castle. She told them about nomadic life, how freedom and flexibility helped the community maintain life and sustainable development through centuries. That story not only inspired, but also sparked a will to change, making many begin to rethink social organization and the role of each individual within it. However, freedom and flexibility also came with risks and challenges. Nomadic life lacked strong fortresses for protection. Each journey was a dangerous adventure requiring unity and wisdom. Isolde had heard of ambushes and bloody clashes between nomadic tribes and large empires. In those battles, their agility, adaptability, and fighting spirit were clearly demonstrated. The spirit of freedom was also shown through the ability of nomadic tribes to connect and exchange culture. They were bridges bringing cultural values, traditions, and combat experience from one region to another, enriching the global cultural mosaic. Isolde felt that to survive in a world full of turmoil and suffocating power, she needed to imbibe that spirit, freedom without constraint, and the ability to adapt to overcome difficulties. One day, standing on the castle balcony, Isolde looked toward the vast horizon. The image of nomads galloping across the steppe appeared in her mind, free, flexible, and resilient people. She understood that the road ahead would still hold many challenges, but with the spirit of freedom and flexibility, she would never be subdued. The story of nomadic life and their spirit of freedom is not only a historical lesson, but also a vivid inspiration for anyone seeking independence and strength in life. The life of nomadic tribes was not only an endless journey of movement, but also a story deeply imbued with a profound bond with nature, the source of life and the divine protector through every step. This bond was not only material, but also spiritual and religious, creating a solid foundation that helped nomadic communities overcome many trials and build a unique and enduring culture. Isolde, a young woman in a powerful castle, after busy days filled with intrigues, power struggles, and suffocating social constraints, began to feel the magical strength from the connection between humans and nature through stories told by nomadic tribes. She felt her eyes and heart open wide upon learning that in another world where nomads lived, life was always linked with deep respect and understanding of nature. In nomadic culture, the sun was not only a bright star guiding the way, but also a sacred symbol of power, life, and rebirth. Nomads believed the sun bestowed energy, illuminated, and gave life to all living beings on Earth. Every day, they performed sun worship rituals at dawn and dusk, moments of transition between day and night, light and darkness, symbols of balance and harmony. Isolde imagined nomads standing before the rising sun, raising their hands to the sky in prayer, their hearts filled with gratitude and humility. This ritual connected them to cosmic energy, strengthening their spirits to continue long, challenging journeys. Not only the sun, but mountains were also revered by nomads as protective spirits. Towering peaks symbolized endurance and timeless strength. They believed mountains preserved the tribe's peace, shielding them from dark forces and unforeseen disasters. Rivers and clear streams were essential sources of life, providing not only drinking water, but also holding deep spiritual significance. The nomads performed rituals honoring the water, seeing it as the spirit of life and rebirth. On important occasions, they often held festivals by the riverside to unite the community and pray for prosperity and health. This spirit was also clearly expressed through rituals of exorcism, purification, and prayers for peace. The nomads used herbs, incense smoke, and traditional songs to drive away evil spirits and maintain purity within the community. These ceremonies were not only spiritual, but also helped strengthen the bonds among tribe members. Isolde recalled the first time she met Morgana, a famous astrologer and healer who guided her to understand energy and balance in life. Morgana told Isolde many stories about the spiritual rituals of the nomads, secrets passed down from generation to generation, and how they lived in harmony and enjoyed the balance between humans and nature. One evening, Isolde joined Morgana at a traditional festival organized by a nomadic tribe during their visit near the castle. The festival atmosphere was filled with music, dancing, and sincere prayers. Isolde felt the powerful vitality in every step, every melody, and the bright eyes of the participants. Stories were told about heroes, battles fought to protect freedom, but above all about respect for nature and the connection with ancestors, the keepers of the nomadic community's spirit. On that journey, Isolde learned that attachment to nature was not only a tradition, but also a way to maintain balance in life, a balance between strength and gentleness, between the individual and the community, between the past and the future. One night, while wandering in the castle garden, Isolde unexpectedly discovered a small area set up as a natural worship place, with ancient stones, herbs, and a small fire that was always kept burning. It was a small corner dedicated to prayer rituals and reverence for nature maintained by predecessors. Feeling the peace and sacredness in that space, Isolde began to understand that true power did not only come from authority or victory, but also from a deep connection with nature and respect for something greater than oneself. However, life was not only filled with peace. Dark forces and pressures of power always lurked, testing Isolde's faith and spirit. But guided by ancient values and trust in nature's strength, she felt more grounded to face every challenge. Once, during a rain prayer ritual with the nomadic community, a fierce storm suddenly struck, with winds howling like angry spirits. Everyone held hands tightly, their faith and spiritual strength tested to the limit. That event became a symbol of the power of community spirit and harmony with nature. No matter how fierce nature was, humans could overcome it by uniting and respecting the universe's balance. Standing amid the storm and heavy rain, Isolde felt a strong connection with those around her and with herself. She understood that no matter how many storms life brought, attachment to nature and faith were solid foundations preventing people from being swept away. Isolde also brought those values back to the castle, where conflicts and power struggles still constantly unfolded. She began to spread and apply lessons about balance and respect for nature into life and relationships within her family and community. Over time, that spirit became a source of mental strength, helping Isolde and her companions overcome the darkest moments, building a strong and resilient community. Thus, the story of the close bond with nature and the beliefs of nomadic tribes is not only a cultural tradition, but also a vivid lesson about the power of spirit, balance, and endurance through time. Under the blazing sun of the American Wild West in the late 19th century, the resounding sounds of steam locomotives seemed to awaken a new era, an era of connection, development, and change. The Transcontinental Railroad, a monumental work linking the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, was not merely a stretch of rails connecting two geographic points, but also a symbol of recovery and progress for a nation after a devastating civil war. Isolde, a brave woman from the Northeast who had witnessed great upheavals in post-Civil War America, now stood at a newly built station in a small western town, where trains stretched like iron dragons winding through valleys, plains, and majestic mountain ranges. She recalled the brutal days of war when the country was deeply divided, the people in sorrow, and the economy in decline. Yet, even in those dark moments, the will to rise and the desire for unity burned in the heart of every citizen. When the Transcontinental Railroad project was proposed and began construction, it was seen as a bridge to the future, a hope for development and unity not only geographically, but also in the spirit of the nation. The railroad construction was far from easy. The tracks crossed wild lands, rugged mountains, scorching deserts, and Native American territories. Every step forward was a challenge, a battle not only with nature but also with opposing forces. Isolde had heard stories of the railroad workers, including Chinese and European immigrants, who endured extreme hardships, working tirelessly under harsh conditions to extend the rails farther each day. Fierce struggles occurred between construction companies, governments, and indigenous communities, full of schemes, betrayals, and even bloody clashes. But despite everything, the railroad was completed, opening a new path of development for America. Isolde witnessed the rapid transformation of railroad towns. From tiny settlements, wild lands gradually turned into bustling commercial centers where agricultural, mineral, and industrial goods were transported quickly and efficiently. Goods trading became easier than ever. shortening transport times from months to just days. This not only boosted the economy, but also helped reduce costs, increase purchasing power, and expand markets. Railroad development also led to population growth as thousands flocked to new areas seeking business opportunities and new lives. This created a strong wave of urbanization, changing the social and economic landscape of America. Isolde also witnessed the cultural diversity connected and blended through the railroad. Immigrants from all over the world, Europe, Asia, and various regions of America gathered to form diverse and vibrant communities. Cultural exchange enriched society and fostered creativity in arts, cuisine, language, and customs. New festivals, traditions, and social concepts were formed and spread rapidly. However, alongside these achievements, the railroad also brought new problems and conflicts. Rapid expansion caused many indigenous communities to lose their lands, suffer poverty, and be forced out of their traditional homes. Conflicts between native peoples and new settlers became more serious, causing bloody battles and irreparable losses. Isolde witnessed heartbreaking scenes as native families were compelled to leave ancestral lands to make way for railroad development and new settlements. One dark night, as the first transcontinental train from east to west arrived at the station, an unexpected event occurred. A group of resisting indigenous people launched an attack to stop the train, creating a tense confrontation between the sides. Isolde, present at the scene, felt the chaos and pain of both parties, those wanting to protect their land and traditions, and those eager to build a new future. The clash was not only a symbol of the meeting between past and present, but also a reminder of the cost of progress. Through turbulent days, the Transcontinental Railroad became the lifeblood of America, connecting people and lands, creating a diverse and ever-developing society. It helped America recover after the devastating Civil War and become an economic and cultural power. Isolde, standing by the train car window, gazed toward the distant horizon, sensing the power of connection and change. She understood that every rail was not just iron linking lands, but a bridge between past and future, between people and their stories. The story of the Transcontinental Railroad is not just about economic and social development, but also a lesson about the power of unity, the aspiration for freedom, and human resilience in the toughest moments. And so, post-Civil War, America's history was written not only by battles and policies, but also by long trains crossing vast lands, linking yearning hearts and dreams never extinguished. Where iron trains crossed deep valleys and rugged mountain peaks, there was an untold story. The story of small but resilient people, immigrant workers who contributed greatly to building the great Transcontinental Railroad. They were people from China and Ireland, carrying not only luggage but also hopes and dreams, while facing brutal challenges, injustice, and unimaginable suffering. Isolde, in her journey of discovery and struggle, often heard chilling accounts of these immigrant workers' lives. Through each story, she felt the outrage, pain, and hidden strength of those living in the shadows of the glorious achievement America proudly celebrated. The Chinese immigrants, called the Iron Men for their extraordinary endurance, were the first to step into the most dangerous construction sites. They worked inside rock tunnels, blasting through mountains with explosives, where accidents could happen at any moment. Isolde once heard of a tragic event, a massive explosion inside a mountain tunnel where dozens of Chinese workers were buried in darkness and the cold silence of stone. Survivors carried the pain of loss and injustice in their hearts, as their efforts were never properly recognized. Alongside them, Irish workers also endured harsh times. They lived in makeshift camps, suffering severe climate hardships and extreme deprivation. Their laughter was sometimes just a mask for long sleepless nights filled with hunger, cold, and fear. Isolde witnessed scenes of Irish workers being forced by employers to work beyond their limits despite many being injured and ill. Injustice and discrimination were evident in low wages, poor working conditions, and lack of medical care. They not only fought nature and dangerous labor, but also faced harsh social prejudice. Locals often regarded them as lowly outsiders, unworthy of respect. One night, in a workers' camp, Isolde heard the silent crying of a Chinese immigrant woman worried about her husband, who had just suffered a workplace accident, but was denied proper medical care. That pain was like a deep cut in her heart. Not only physically, immigrant workers were also deprived of rights, forbidden to express their voices, join unions, or participate in movements demanding rights. They lived in isolation and under strict control. Isolde realized that the great achievement of the Transcontinental Railroad could not be separated from the painful stories and silent struggles of immigrant workers, those who sacrificed and endured to make the dream of a united country a reality. One day, when Isolde and a group of progressives in the castle discussed justice and rights, she shared stories about immigrant workers moving everyone and deepening their awareness of existing injustices. The lives of immigrants were vivid evidence of the cruelty of the economic and social system at that time, where profit and progress were prioritized over human health and rights. Isolde was determined to be the voice for those who had none, using her power and influence to change injustice so that workers, whether native or immigrant, could live and work in safe and respectful conditions. This struggle was not easy, as conservative forces and personal interests always tried to maintain the status quo. But Isolde, like the strong women before her, never gave up. One stormy night, a group of immigrant workers was forced by employers to work beyond their limits in dangerous conditions, leading to a serious accident. Isolde immediately intervened, brought the case to the authorities, and used all resources to help victims and their families. This event became a turning point in the fight for workers' rights, attracting public attention and forcing authorities to reconsider labor policies. Isolde understood that deep change required not only top-down intervention, but also raising awareness and solidarity among the workers themselves. She began organizing meetings, educating them about their rights and occupational health, encouraging them to stand up for themselves. Step by step, Isolde's movement spread, creating echoes in the community and making those who exploited labor cautious. The story of immigrant workers and their struggle is a reminder of the price of development and the power of perseverance, courage, and unity. Standing on the platform one sunset afternoon, watching trains pass by, Isolde silently acknowledged that behind those long rails were human stories, people who contributed to history, though sometimes forgotten. Thus, the story of immigrant workers in building the Transcontinental Railroad is not only a tragedy, but also an inspiration for those fighting for justice and freedom in any era. Where the vast prairie fields once served as home to ancient indigenous tribes, the roar of transcontinental iron trains was like invisible iron dragons devouring land, life, and the souls of communities that had survived for centuries. The railroad crossing their lands was not just tracks and trains, but a symbol of invasion, cultural damage, and the breaking of natural balance, historical wounds difficult to heal. During her days stepping into new lands to build her castle and reign, Isolde encountered many heartbreaking stories about the gradual disappearance of nomadic life and indigenous beliefs. She heard tales of tribes once free to gallop across the steppes, now forced to live oppressed, losing lands and being displaced from ancestral grounds. Though the Transcontinental Railroad opened an era of economic and social development for America, it was a dagger plunged deep into the hearts of indigenous tribes. Vast lands that were once hunting grounds, gathering places, and homes of Native Americans were now divided and occupied, completely altering traditional ways of life. Isolde witnessed families of indigenous people being forced to abandon their homes, watching their belongings and possessions loaded onto trucks and driven away, her heart filled with pain and anger. Many elderly and children could not endure the changes and losses. Illness and death claimed numerous lives. The relocation was not only a change of residence, but also a profound loss of culture. The spiritual values tied to the land, the sacred mountains, the holy rivers where ancestors once worshipped, were severed, making traditional rituals incomplete. Many stories tell that ceremonies to pray for rain, harvests, or other spiritual festivals could not be performed when the indigenous people were separated from their homeland. Their souls seemed suffocated, their faith shaken, leading to spiritual and social imbalance. Isolde heard about fierce resistances from tribes as the railroad approached. They refused to be driven away or to see their ancestral lands disappear. Bloody clashes between indigenous people and soldiers protecting the railroad project occurred, leaving deep wounds in history. One dark night, when the first train passed through Lakota territory, a group of native warriors launched an attack to sabotage the train. The clash was not only a battle over land, but also a symbol of the fight to reclaim honor and the right to live. When Isolde learned of this event, she felt sorrow and reflected on the contradiction between development and preservation, between power and justice. She realized that progress could not be based solely on exploitation and invasion, but must be accompanied by respect and harmony. The living environment of indigenous tribes was also severely threatened by the railroad project. Green forests were cut down, rivers polluted, wildlife lost their habitats, all painting a sorrowful picture of nature's destruction. Isolde once met an elder from a native tribe who told her about climate changes, failing crops, and the increasing difficulty of hunting. The elder said, "The land is our soul. When the land is lost, the soul fades away." The damage was not only material, but also deeper spiritual and cultural wounds. Indigenous people lost their voice, lost control over their lives, and were forced to live under rules and laws imposed by outsiders. Isolde understood that healing these historical wounds was not easy. It required awareness, reconciliation, and justice from both sides, the builders of the future and the keepers of the past. In secret meetings, Isolde spoke on behalf of indigenous communities, urging those in power in the castle and the lands under her influence to reconsider policies and actions. She proposed solutions to protect the rights and culture of indigenous people, while seeking harmony between economic development and environmental conservation. Despite facing much opposition and challenges, Isolde did not give up. She knew her voice might not echo widely immediately, but it was the beginning of sustainable change. The story of the Transcontinental Railroad is not only about development and prosperity, but also a profound reminder of the cost of progress, the loss of cultures, values, and people. Standing on the platform in the fiery red sunset, Isolde watched the trains running through vast lands, quietly vowing that every stretch of railroad was not just a path of material goods, but also a road toward mutual understanding and respect. Thus, in the vast canvas of history, the stories of indigenous peoples and their suffering will forever be valuable lessons for future generations. Lessons about respect, justice, and the power of empathy. The long iron trains wend like iron dragons, stretching across hills, valleys, and deserts, carrying the hope of a nation awakening after the nightmare of the Civil War. The Transcontinental Railroad, a symbol of industrial development and ambition, has completely transformed America's landscape. Yet, beside that glory, there remain shadows, wounds, and untold tragic stories. Isolde, a young woman stepping into a world full of power and upheaval, witnessed firsthand the conflicts and sacrifices deeply embedded in the construction of this legendary railroad. The project was not only a grand technical achievement, but also a symbol of the struggle between progress and inevitable harm. From the very beginning, building the Transcontinental Railroad faced harsh challenges. Wild, rugged lands with diverse terrain and severe weather became the true battlegrounds for workers and engineers. Accidents, explosions, landslides, and diseases claimed the lives of thousands of laborers, many of whom were Chinese and Irish immigrants, nameless people whose contributions to the project were undeniable. The drama extended beyond dangerous work sites to labor rights struggles, discrimination and oppression endured by the workers. Strikes, protests, and even small riots quietly unfolded under the shadows of the new towns sprouting along the tracks. Isolde once heard of a horrifying night when a group of Chinese immigrant workers was attacked by hostile rivals, leaving many wounded and fleeing in despair. That event reflected the deep divisions and prejudice in society at the time. The railroad also symbolized invasion and destruction for indigenous tribes. Sacred lands, forests, rivers were cut apart, and mountains once revered by ancestors were leveled to serve development projects. Isolde met an elder from a native tribe who told her about days of loss, when sacred lands were seized, rituals could no longer be performed, and the call of ancestors seemed silenced. The conflict between industrialization and tradition preservation, between ambition and social justice, painted a complex and contradictory historical picture. Small towns along the railroad grew rapidly, but many became squalid slums where workers lived cramped in poor and unstable conditions. Isolde witnessed exhausted, sick laborers exploited and underpaid. They lived in fear and uncertainty, but persisted with hope for a better future. The economic development the railroad brought was not for everyone. The wealthy and powerful monopolized benefits, while workers and indigenous communities bore heavy consequences. Isolde realized that building a just and sustainable society required looking beyond material achievements to consider spiritual, cultural, and environmental wounds. One night, standing on the station platform watching trains stretch beyond the horizon, Isolde thought of those left behind: exhausted workers, displaced communities, fading traditions. She resolved to use her voice to denounce injustice, fight for the rights of the vulnerable, and protect precious cultural values. That journey was far from easy. She faced resistance from powerful forces, sinister conspiracies, and suspicion even from those around her. But like Tamiris and Boudicca, the strong female leader she once admired, Isolde did not give up. She understood that strength was not only in power or physical might, also in perseverance, courage, and unyielding faith. The Transcontinental Railroad, with all its glory and wounds, became an important part of America's historical story, a story of development, struggle, and profound lessons about responsibility and justice. And so, beneath the radiant sunset, Isolde stood on the platform, head held high, ready to follow in the footsteps of those before her, to help write a new chapter, a chapter of justice, harmony, and indomitable strength.